Okay. It's my extreme pleasure to introduce Neil Wehneman, the Development Director of the Secular Student Alliance. One of my favorite questions to ask people when I'm getting to know them is, tell me something important that you've changed your mind about. Sort of the reason that I'm interested in that is that there's not a whole lot that I have needed to change my mind about in my life. I was raised an atheist, and I'm still an atheist. But when you take that question and you ask that question to Neil, you'll sort of get like, where do you want me to start? Neil was raised a fundamentalist Christian, was involved in Campus Crusade for Christ while he was an undergrad here at Ohio State, and was specifically occasionally ran into the Students for Free Thought at the Ohio State University at times while he was here. And Neil has also reinvented himself sort of career-wise. So he is trained as a lawyer and has done that for many years, but has now decided to become a fundraiser and is really awesome to have on the team at the Secular Student Alliance in that capacity, and has changed in a whole lot of other ways that I'm sure he could tell you about if we had more time. But that capacity to be incredibly thoughtful and detail-oriented, and then not only realize that you are maybe wrong about something, but then go on to change not only your mind, but your public-facing identity, I just find incredibly impressive. So it is my extreme honor to welcome to the stage Neil Wehneman.
Thanks so much, Alex. See if I can get the mic to cooperate. There we go. And go ahead and step out in front so I can see my slides. So welcome everybody. Title of this talk is Not a Misprint, the Importance of Theist-Inclusive Spaces. A lot of material, not a lot of time, buckle up. So, who am I and why should you care? A little bit of this will overlap with August's introduction, but I am the Development Director for the Secular Student Alliance, so I am full-time paid staff doing our fundraising work. I've been part of the SSA in that capacity for the last 2.5 years. I am also the chair of the board of directors for Poly Columbus. Poly Columbus is a Central Ohio-focused organization that is a community for the ethically non-monogamous. So another way of saying that, folks that have multiple simultaneous intimate relationships with everyone's knowledge and consent. And this will become relevant to the talk. I'm not just oversharing. Finally, I'm also on the leadership team for Sunday Assembly Columbus. So Sunday Assembly, for those who haven't heard about it, is a celebration of life, the natural world, this one life we all know that we have. Occasionally it's been referred to as atheist church. So I'm involved with that, and again, we'll be talking about it as we go. So my last boss, before joining the SSA, often told me, lead with the conclusion. So I'm going to go ahead and lead with the conclusion. If you'd like, you can leave after the slide and get the substance of the talk. So first off, human-based happiness, also known as humanism, is the ultimate goal. This is an axiom. This is the foundation. The happiness of conscious creatures with a special emphasis on humanity is what matters. A lot of people call that humanism, myself included. The nuns are rising. But most folks don't even know what humanism is. So we've got this third under 30 that are non-religious, but how many of those are actually humanists or have those types of values? We've got to deal with that question. Atheist-focused spaces are critically important. We have to have spaces where atheists, humanists, other non-theists can be themselves and feel safe, but they're not enough if our goal is to fully reach our society. We have to have a multi-pronged approach. We must also create theist-inclusive spaces, where we are organizing and building community based on shared values as opposed to necessarily labels. Meaning and purpose, or what I call value-driven happiness, is how we continue to grow our impact. This is an additional prong that we need to be adding to our long-term strategy. And our long-term goal is neutrality, so a secular government, a secular society, places where people can have a broad spectrum of beliefs and you're not going to be encountering stigma or be ostracized. So, for those who want to stick around for the full talk, we'll get started. So what's the ultimate goal? The ultimate goal is the happiness of conscious creatures with a special emphasis on humanity. A lot of folks call that humanism. Humanism, or humanist, is my primary self-identifier. This is how I view the world. And we are taking over the world, as a lot of people are talking about. This is from the May 2015 Pew Forum study. The unaffiliated, the non-religious, that is now the second largest organized religion. There are more nuns than Catholics. And so this is a big deal where people talking about the trajectory and talking about the secularization of the United States. Now, we're taking over the world, but kind of. It depends on how you define we. When we look at the data, first column is 2007, second column is 2014 with the delta between them. We've got about 3% that identify as atheist, 4% that identify as agnostic, and 16% that identify as nothing in particular, the spiritual but not religious. So who are those folks? At the SSA, we've been spending a lot of time trying to break down the SBNR to understand that so that we can decide who are the folks that we're trying to reach, that we're trying to serve. And we have kind of three big buckets within the spiritual but not religious. And the first bucket is what we're calling the faith retainers or the dones. And these are the people that are done with church, but they're not necessarily done with Jesus. You know, they are retaining their faith. They see the value of ritual or using this worldview. They just don't want to be called a Christian or a Methodist or a Catholic or whatever it is. You know, it's about a relationship with Jesus, not a religion. You know, as this recent book on Amazon is called, they like Jesus but not the church. And the SSA has decided these are not our folks. These are not the people that we exist to serve. They might be interfaith allies, they might be people that we work with, but they are not the folks that we are directly trying to serve. Another part of the spiritual but not religious are what we're calling the unsubstantiated. And we have various categories within that. For example, one of the subcategories are the paranormal. So the unsubstantiated generally is dealing with folks who believe in things that have not been substantiated or proven or supported by tools of evidence and reason and science. So one example, there's a show on cable called Ghost Hunters where people, you know, come in with these scientific instruments and try and make the argument that ghosts exist in this particular residence. That is an example of folks that are unsubstantiated, spiritual but not religious. And again, those are the folks that we don't directly exist to serve. They might be allies, might be folks we work with, but we're not seeking to serve them. Finally, we have a third category that we're calling the spiritual naturalism, or spiritual naturalism, or something along those lines. And Sam Harris, his recent book, Waking Up, is a really great example of that, where he's talking about spiritual experiences, mystical experiences, insights that you get through meditation. And this is a lot of language that's like, you know, throwing up red flags. It's like, wait a second, that sounds kind of weird. But everything he's doing is rooted in naturalism. It's rooted in the chemical and biological processes going on in our brains. And so these folks, they don't use our language, they don't use our labels, but they do share our values. And these are the folks that we're trying to reach and include. Those folks that may be spiritual, but it's a naturalistic spirituality. So the obvious question is, how does this break down? How many are faith retainers? How many are unsubstantiated? How many are naturalistic spirituality? And the answer is we don't know. This is not a question that's been polled. This is not a question where there's a lot of research out there where we can say these are the relative proportions of that. So if we want to flip back to this, if we just want to say, well, let's call it a third that's ours, that puts us at 12%. So 12% of society are the folks that we might consider to be functional humanists. So we have some continued challenges as we're trying to figure out how do we grow that 12%. There's been a lot of talk. This is a quote from the executive director of Lifeway Research saying that the folks that are peeling off, they weren't the real Christians. They weren't the true Scotsmen. These are the folks that really weren't committed, and so it's going to be really hard for secularism to gain additional traction because the folks that are left are really committed to that. I don't necessarily agree with that, but that's a thesis we have to deal with. We also have to recognize that a lot of the folks that are in the spiritual but not religious are what I call the atheists. And you know, these are the folks, if you press them, they're going to say, well, of course there probably isn't a God. Why are you asking me such a silly question? This is not how they organize their lives. This is not how they decide what organizations to join and how to take collective action. They just don't care about that. They care about so many other things instead. Finally, we have to recognize privilege. And this is a topic we could spend an entire conference on. I'm going to talk about it very briefly. The Pew Forum research points out that the folks that identify as atheist and agnostic look and have lived a lot like me. White heterosexual cis males from an upper middle class background with 1 or more degrees. And we have to recognize that as a movement and continue to build spaces and take action to make it so that folks that have less privilege than that can still become part of the movement, can still be included. So we just have to recognize that as we're working to continue to expand. So the bottom line here is that folks that are atheist, agnostic, humanist, or something similar, we're probably going to be outnumbered for the foreseeable future. And we have to figure out what's the next step that we're going to take. So what's the ultimate goal? Let's remember that. The ultimate goal is humanism, happiness of conscious creatures with a special emphasis on humanity. So humanism isn't even being polled. When we look at the Pew Forum, they're asking people atheist, agnostic, or nothing in particular. And so atheist-focused spaces matter. It is critically important that we have a safe space to call our own, to meet like-minded folks. But if that is the entirety of our strategy, we're not going to continue reaching other folks and spreading our ultimate values. So that's not enough. We have to ask, what is it that people want? Because there's so many people out there where if you say, hey, do you want to come and join a humanist community, they're going to be like, a what? And that's not something that they're interested in because they're an atheist or whatnot. So we have to deal with that. We also have to deal with what I call the vacuum problem. A lot of folks probably recognize Richard Dawkins. The other person up here is Leonard Tramiel. He's on the board of directors for the Center for Inquiry and a friend of mine. And he shared a story with me, which he gave me permission to share here, where he was talking with Richard Dawkins and said, hey Richard, here's a thought exercise. If I gave you a magic wand and you could wave it and religious ideas would just disappear, do you think that would solve society's problems? And he said, no, I really don't think it would. Because all of these bad ideas that we have or ways of hurting each other, we would just come up with it again. We wouldn't necessarily use religion to come up with it, but we have to fill that vacuum. We have to fill that void. And this is a picture from an evangelical organization, and they're talking about filling the void, talking about what is it that people are lacking, what is it that people want. And we have to answer that, and we have to provide that. So again, the ultimate goal, humanism, happiness of conscious creatures. So what makes people happy? People become happy when they are able to live their values. And this is a big shift that the SSA has taken with our new mission, vision, and values, where we're talking more about organizing around values than organizing around labels. Do you agree with our core values? If you agree with those and live with those, then you're probably the folks that we want to be working with. And we're less concerned with what you call yourselves. Another way of looking at this is what gives people meaning and purpose. What is the values-driven happiness that they get? And I have up here this newspaper article from the UK on atheists want their own church. And one way that a lot of people find meaning and purpose historically has been through church. And so with Sunday Assembly, we're saying, hey, you can get all the good bits of that. You can get all the connections and the neighbors and the folks that you're going out and changing the world with and serving those in need. And we can get rid of the stuff that really doesn't matter to you. And so that's something that really resonates with a lot of folks. Another thing that really resonates with a lot of folks are their intimate relationships. I get a great deal of meaning and purpose and happiness out of the people that I intimately relate to. And so when I tell people, hey, if you're engaging in multiple simultaneous intimate relationships, we have an organization where you can meet other folks, where you can learn how to work through difficulties. People are like, that's awesome, sign me up, when do you meet? This is something that people care about. And so we have to provide that to them. And when we provide that, we can provide that in a way that is worldview inclusive. This is a lot of text. It's a policy excerpt from a policy that I think Poly Columbus should be drafting, or should be passing in a few days. I have permission to share it. But Poly Columbus, we talk about being worldview inclusive. We don't privilege specific worldviews, we don't denigrate specific worldviews, but there are limits to our neutrality. And the limits to our neutrality is our values. And we say our bedrock principles, our values, if you have a worldview that conflicts with that, then this probably isn't the right place for you. If you have a worldview that says consent doesn't matter, that says that sex is something that we should be ashamed of, that says that people should not have personal autonomy, Poly Columbus probably isn't the place for you. And so this is how we say that we're going to be worldview inclusive. Everyone is welcome, no matter what you believe, so long as you're consistent with our values. And this has served us well. And from the standpoint of spreading humanism, there's a lot of cross-pollination that takes place. For example, Poly Columbus, we were on the Humanist Hour, which is the official podcast of the American Humanist Association, talking about polyamory. And so suddenly we're talking about polyamory to a few 100,000 of our closest friends that follow AHA, And a bunch of people in Poly Columbus are hearing about humanism because they're like, yes, we were on the humanist hour. And one of our board members, Susan Porter, who took part in the interview, she told me, and she said I could share this, that yeah, I've been a humanist for years. I just didn't realize that was the label for it. And so now she's identifying as a humanist because of the fact that we're getting cross-pollination on the values that we share and that people care about. And this is something that people are doing in real life. This is from the Pew Forum, or the Pew Research Center, where they're looking at intermarried religious couples, so folks that are Christian and unaffiliated, and it's going up. It's gotten to the point where, Dale McGowan is writing a book on it. And so having a space where you can interact with people on your shared values, even if your worldview isn't the same, is something that a lot of people derive meaning and purpose from, to the point where they're committing their lives to each other. So the last point I want to talk about is becoming more neutral. And one of our goals, with secularism, we talk about having a secular government, a government where the government is neutral, is not saying this religion is good, this non-religion is bad. That's really important. We get a lot of value out of that. We also get a lot of value out of using gender-neutral pronouns, accepting, that they is now a gender-neutral singular pronoun. Doesn't matter what you were taught in grade school, you need to accept that. This is something that makes people feel included, raises human happiness, where we're not forcing people to get in gender box A or get in gender box B. And one of the ways that this pays out, and this is a personal story, about 6 months ago, my 9-year-old niece died of cancer. And my family is very religious. I am not. And at the funeral, there were a lot of religious speakers, a lot of folks talking about that particular worldview, and that was something that was very hard for me as someone who was close to my niece. But one of the things that I got a lot of value out of was one of the speakers was also a journalist, and this is from her newspaper column, where she's talking about Harper, and she's talking about the comet Lovejoy, that was discovered by an astronomer named Lovejoy, and the theme of the funeral was Choose Joy. And she's talking about, the heavens and the stars and the celestial realm and all of this stuff. But she's intentionally using language that resonates with the religious and resonates with the non-religious as well. And so this was deeply meaningful, and yet it was neutral. It was something that was inclusive. And so the more that we create worldview inclusive spaces, the more we're going to be creating a norm of using neutral language in world events and life events. And that is something that's going to increase human happiness. So thank you very much. Here's my contact information. If you want to shoot me an email, connect on Facebook, give me a call, be around as well. Happy to take questions afterwards. I suspect I'm at the end of my time. Amber, how are you doing on time?
You have time for some questions.
Excellent. So if anybody wants to ask questions, would love to chat right now on camera. Go for it.
I guess one of the hardest things I've noticed when trying to talk to people who may identify as Christian, but their values tend to be more humanistic, not necessarily subscribe to the specific discriminatory prescriptions of the religion. They understand what to separate, and so a lot of times it seems like they sort of have an assumption that everybody has that ability, and so maybe the church isn't as bad as people are making out to be. So how do you go about persuading those people without coming across as too combative, or not combative?
So from my own experience, the most effective way to persuade somebody is to be their friend. When I went through my deconversion from Christianity, it was somebody that I had a personal relationship with, that I would actually listen to them when they would share concerns or ask me questions about that. And so I think that the more time that you can spend with somebody in a way that works for you as well as works for them, that will actually get you to the point where, yeah, we can share beers and have a conversation about this, as opposed to simply having an argument. So yeah, building up those personal relationships is something that's really critically important, because there isn't a single thing you can say, which is, hey, here's the one true argument to rule them all, and therefore, oh, you're right, I forget about Jesus. What is it that you ascribe to? So yeah, just being able to spend time with folks is a critical piece there. Other questions? In the back.
Yes, you talked about humanism as a thoughtful approach to life, and maximizing happiness and so on. What would you say is the opposite of humanism?
What would you say is the opposite of humanism?
Well, if I'm thinking of humanism as an approach, a thoughtful approach, where we are trying to check the evidence, think carefully, show compassion, care, support the human race, then the opposite of humanism doesn't seem to me to be religion, but to be bigotry, and a thoughtless approach to life that causes harm.
Yeah, and definitely that does not increase human happiness, it decreases human happiness. So yeah, and the point here is to say, what are our values? Where do we overlap? Let's hang out where we overlap. And using that as a process by which we can say, hey, let's not harm people. Let's not engage in that type of conduct. So, yes?
How do we be neutral and inclusive with people that are basing their ideas on faith when their faith-based thinking is doing so much harm in the world today continuously? We're fighting against it every day.
Right. So the way that Poly-Columbus handles that is we say, these are our values, and when you take action, including, we have a community conduct policy which we passed and we talk about there, we take action when people engage in conduct, even speech, that causes harm. And so we're saying, here's all the positive stuff. Here's all the stuff that we care about. And again, I use the 3 examples of consent, sex positivity, and personal autonomy. And when somebody has a faith or has a belief there that conflicts with that, and it moves from being something that they have inside their head to something that they are sharing in our space, or they are telling somebody that they're doing something wrong, that's when we as a board will step in and say, okay, you're interfering with us having a safe, comfortable, and welcoming environment. So now we're going to take action to talk with you privately, explain why that doesn't work out, and then figure out, is this the right place for you? So it's really clearly defining what your values are and what your expectations are. And then when conflicts come up from there, taking action. Yeah.
Also, Christian groups have a lot of money and they'll spend it on you. And why would you not want to spend their money on pizza, particularly?
As far as like doing shared events and stuff like that?
We did a joint event with Crew at our university, and they bought so much pizza from the best place in town that we all took some home. And there were like 30 people there, so that tells you a lot about how much pizza they were willing to buy us.
Right. So your shared values are pizza.
Among other things.
Yes.
It was an event where we told stories. We just told our stories about our worldviews and how we came to and stuff like that. It wasn't arguing with each other. It was telling stories, and it worked really well. And we had pizza.
Yeah.
So use their pizza money.
Yeah. Well, and I've had conversations with folks that are part of the Secular Student Alliance where they first come to the Secular Student Alliance because they're part of a Christian group. And they're like, oh, wow, I like you folks better than I like this other group, and I'm going to head over here and hang out with you folks now.
That's exactly why I did that.
Oh, cool. All right, so I got 5 minutes left. Apparently I spoke really fast on these slides. Other questions? Yeah.
Do you think that the use of labels is what turns some of the nuns off to just saying, I'm a nun, instead of being labeled atheist or agnostic or humanist? Or I think that because atheist is perceived as such a negative word, especially around nuns. Do you think that plays a part in the number of nuns being as large as
Yeah, that's definitely a big part of it. And there's tension there because having consistent labels, having consistent words, this is how we spread meaning. This is how we engage in conversation with folks. So we can't just say everyone is a special snowflake and we're not going to try and use any way of referring to people collectively. But that is something that turns a lot of people off. And so one theory that I'm kind of working with is that labels are most important at kind of like, the marketing level or the broadcast level, or where you're doing high-level analysis. But when you actually engage with somebody, when you're actually able to say, tell me about your life, okay, well, we can set the labels aside because I can have a personal relationship with you. The problem with that is that, as individuals, we can only have so many personal relationships before we run out of, storage space up here. So we got to figure out how to handle that tension. But I think a lot of people don't like being put into a particular box, or they don't like, well, I don't want to be a humanist because you define it in a way that I don't like, and that's not how, even though we agree on the happiness of conscious creatures, that's not a label that appeals to me. So that's something you have to recognize. Yeah?
To further complicate the labels thing, I was invited once to attend a very liberal church which exists here in the city, and I told the person I was an atheist. He said, quote, Oh, that's fine. There's several atheists that go to our church.
Was it a UU church?
No, I'm actually a mainline denomination, a very liberal church that's part of a mainline denomination.
Cool.
But just, there are also church-going Christians who are in fact atheists or agnostic.
Right. So, yeah.
I'll just share one other anecdote. A very conservative Christian who works on the anti-LGBT side of the movement once was upset that I was always calling him anti-LGBT on Twitter. He's like, I wish you could just come to church with me and you'd see that that's not all that we talk about. So I called his bluff and I actually went to his very conservative, New Age evangelical church. And the sermon that day even happened to deal with unbelief in a very inaccurate, unsurprisingly way. But what was really interesting was debriefing. I got nothing out of it that he thought I would, but he spent the whole time seeing his service through my eyes and had a lot of interesting reflections to share. So we're still arch nemesis, but the fact that I went and I met the pastor, I met some of the other people that he was friends with there, and was just very open to it all, affected him in some actually profound ways.
Cool. Yeah.
Would you say that it's important to try to turn around some of the stereotypes about what an atheist is? For example, it's got such negative connotations. Do you think that's an important goal, or do you think we should set aside labels for the most part?
I think we're capable of attacking multiple angles of the same problem at once. And so I think that rehabilitating terms such as atheist and fleshing out what humanism means, I think is really important. Because again, I feel like that word does convey meaning. It's a conversation starter. At the same time, we have to recognize that there's a lot of people that have never heard of the word, or with certain words they have a really bad turnoff to it. So to the extent that on an individual basis we can be talking about values, I think that tends to be more productive. It's just that we have to define what those values are. And saying, we believe in critical inquiry and compassion and reason and everything else, that takes many more syllables than humanism. And so we've got to figure out what are the contexts in which we can be talking about values and listing all of those off, versus where are the situations where you've got 2 syllables to be able to convey it. You got to get it fast. So, and I got to stop now.
Do you want a quick question?
We can talk afterwards.
What did you major in?
Information systems, College of Business.